My daughter-in-law looked straight at me and said, "Frank, my parents are moving into your house next Saturday. We've already told them yes." She didn't ask for permission. She didn't even present it as an idea. She said it the same way someone would read tomorrow's weather report. Calm, confident, and completely certain. Behind her, my son stood quietly, staring at the kitchen floor as if it was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county. Building bridges was my job, real bridges made of steel and concrete. One thing that career taught me is that every structure depends on a solid foundation. If the foundation is weak, eventually everything above it starts to fail. It also taught me something else. When a structure develops serious problems, you can't fix it with fresh paint or decorative touches. At some point, you have to face the issue directly and deal with it properly. My name is Frank. I live alone in a 4-bedroom house in Greenfield, Ohio. It's the kind of town where people usually know each other's business, yet it's still quiet enough that you can sit in your backyard on a Sunday afternoon and not see another person for hours. My wife, Carol, passed away 4 years ago after suffering a stroke. It happened suddenly. One day she was here, and the next she wasn't. Losing her changed everything. In the months after her death, I handled things the way many men from my generation do. I stayed busy. I cut the grass. I repaired things around the house. I attended my grandson's baseball games. I kept moving because stopping felt harder. I stayed in the house because Carol loved it. And if I'm being honest, there are still mornings when I wake up expecting to smell coffee brewing in the kitchen, the way she used to make it. My son Daniel is 34 years old. About 3 years ago, he married a woman named Melissa. Their wedding was beautiful. It was held outdoors in late September when the leaves had just started changing colors. The weather was perfect. I paid for a large portion of the wedding because Daniel asked for help and because I genuinely liked Melissa back then. She was intelligent, funny, successful, and worked in pharmaceutical sales. From everything I could see, Daniel had chosen a good partner. Looking back now, there were things I either failed to notice or chose to ignore. One of those things was Melissa's relationship with her parents. Her father, Raymond, had retired at 58 after hurting his back. Her mother, Gloria, had never worked outside the home. They lived about 40 minutes away in a rental house in Lancaster. From everything I observed, managing money wasn't exactly their strength. Raymond drove a truck that seemed far beyond what his budget should have allowed. Gloria redecorated their living room twice in a single year. They always seemed to be caught between plans, between jobs, between solutions, and between financial problems that never quite got solved. At the time, none of that seemed like my concern. Then one day, it became my concern. Like most situations of this kind, it started small. About 6 months after the wedding, Melissa casually mentioned during a family dinner that her parents were struggling financially. Raymond's truck had broken down, and they had fallen behind on rent. Daniel nodded sympathetically. I listened but kept quiet because it wasn't my place to get involved. A few weeks later, Melissa brought it up again. This time she talked about how difficult it was for her parents to find an affordable apartment. Housing prices were rising. Rent was expensive. Things were difficult. Again, I listened and didn't say much. Then one Sunday afternoon, Daniel and Melissa showed up at my house without calling first. I was in the garage sorting through Carol's gardening tools. Every now and then I would organize them even though they were already organized. It gave me an excuse to spend time around things that had belonged to her. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Melissa looked confident. In fact, she looked like someone who already knew how the conversation was supposed to end. She explained that her parents needed somewhere to stay. Temporarily, she said, making air quotes with her fingers in a way that somehow made the word sound even less temporary. According to her, Raymond and Gloria's landlord was selling the property. They had 60 days to move out and hadn't found another place they could afford. Then she said something I never forgot. "You have 4 bedrooms, Frank. You live by yourself. It just makes sense." I slowly put down the small garden trowel I was holding. Then I looked at my son. He met my eyes for maybe half a second before looking away. "It doesn't make sense to me," I replied. Melissa smiled politely, but it was the kind of smile people use when they think you're missing something obvious. "Frank, it would only be temporary. 2 or 3 months at most. You have plenty of room. It would really help the family." I want to make something clear. I didn't yell. I didn't get angry. I simply said, "This is my home, Melissa. I'll think about it." Then I walked inside and finished my coffee. That night, I thought about it very carefully. I thought about how often 2 or 3 months turns into a year or more when people have nowhere else to go. I thought about Raymond's expensive truck. I thought about Gloria's spending habits. I thought about what would happen if 2 adults moved into my house without a lease, without a deadline, and without any real reason to leave. Most of all, I thought about being 63 years old and finally having the quiet life I had worked decades to build. By the time I went to sleep, I already knew my answer. A few days later, I called Daniel, just Daniel. I explained that I wasn't comfortable with the arrangement. I told him I loved him and wanted to help however I reasonably could, but I was not willing to have Raymond and Gloria move into my home. I also told him that if they needed assistance with a security deposit or moving expenses, I would be willing to contribute a reasonable amount, but they could not live with me. Daniel said he understood. He said he would speak with Melissa, and he did. The next evening, Melissa called me herself. That conversation went much differently. She told me I was being selfish. She said Carol would have wanted me to help family. She argued that I had more than enough room and that keeping a 4-bedroom house for myself while her parents struggled was, in her words, morally troubling. That was the exact phrase she used, morally troubling. I let her finish speaking. Then I calmly said, "Melissa, my answer is still no." And I ended the call. Send continue, and I'll rewrite the next large section in the same style while keeping the volume and story intact.